Hey, I'm Neurosurgeon Kazu.
This spinning 3D rendering of the human brain highlights exactly how dense its internal biological networks really are. A working neurosurgeon has to successfully memorize tens of thousands of these precise anatomical structures, nerve clusters, and highly complex surgical procedures. You would naturally expect that someone with a genius-level intellect who navigates this biology daily wouldn't break a sweat taking a basic multiple-choice World Heritage certification exam. But right now, one highly experienced doctor is facing a massive academic wall. He spends his evenings reading through hundreds of pages of historical facts, only to wake up the next morning finding that almost every single date and name has completely vanished from his mind. If you've ever studied for a test or tried to pick up a new skill, you know the feeling. When we review the same notes repeatedly, but nothing sticks, our immediate instinct is to blame ourselves. We assume we just aren't smart enough, or that we're simply getting too old to retain new information. But if a brain surgeon is experiencing this exact same mental block, it clearly isn't a lack of intelligence. What we experience as forgetting is not a symptom of a weak mind. It is a strict, unavoidable biological feature of how human brains are programmed to work. Every piece of information that enters your mind has to pass through a specific biological checkpoint first, a small seahorse-shaped structure called the hippocampus. This simplified cross-section illustrates exactly how that checkpoint operates. The hippocampus has one very primitive job. It evaluates every incoming shape and piece of data by asking a single question. Does knowing this help us survive? If the answer is yes, the data moves deeper into the brain. If not, it gets dumped into the void. This explains the neurosurgeon's paradox. When he studies clinical medicine, those facts are tied to real human lives, hospital experiences, and physical consequences. The hippocampus flags that interconnected data as critical survival information and waves it right through. But when that same doctor tries to memorize when a specific temple was built, the brain reacts differently. To the hippocampus, isolated historical dates and names are just floating, meaningless numbers and letters. Stripped of context, they carry zero obvious survival value. So the brain does exactly what it was designed to do with useless jump data. It trashes it. When you fail to memorize a list of flashcards, your brain isn't failing you. It's functioning perfectly. To get non-essential information to stick, you have to bypass that security system. You have to intentionally trick your hippocampus into treating dry facts like matters of life and death. Here in this diagram, we see the first biological hack. By attaching a narrative to a fact, like the dramatic history of why a monument was built, you trigger a spark of emotion. That emotion releases dopamine, which carries the fact right past the hippocampus filter and anchors it into the temporal lobe. The second hack involves forcing that newly anchored data to grow. Reading text on a page doesn't achieve this, but when you actively explain that concept to someone else, your brain is forced to physically build and reinforce the neural connections, shown here as a thickening line between the nodes. Passively reading text guarantees deletion. Active, emotional engagement forces the hippocampus to flag information for permanent storage. Even with the perfect study techniques, there are physiological barriers that can completely shut down your ability to remember. The most common barrier is the intense panic of cramming for a test. The thought of, I have to memorize this right now, generates a massive biological stress response. In this visualization of stress in the brain, you can see a flood of cortisol molecules swarming the hippocampus. In high doses, this hormone doesn't just distract you, it is actively, visibly eroding the cells, shrinking the precise brain structure you rely on to learn. The only way to repair this environment is through sleep. Specifically, non-REM sleep is the exclusive biological window where the brain organizes all the data you took in during the day and permanently solidifies it into long-term memory. You can stack the biological deck in your favor by taking a 15-minute walk and eating foods rich in glucose and lecithin. This increases blood flow and delivers the raw energy the brain needs to keep the storage process running smoothly. All-nighters deliver diminishing returns and actively dismantle the biological machinery required to hold on to information. Armed with a clear understanding of his own biology, our neurosurgeon decided to ditch the flashcards and rewrite his approach to the World Heritage exam. He replaced rote memorization with visualization imagining himself actually traveling to these historic sites to spark an emotional response. He started cornering his hospital staff to enthusiastically teach them world history, forcing active recall. And most importantly, he committed to a strict 7-hour sleep schedule. This outcome reaches past a trivia test. When we dive into dense, unfamiliar subjects as adults, the brain builds structural resilience through the act of learning itself. This microscopic view shows the result. Intellectual challenges force the brain to branch out and physically multiply its connections. This dense networking creates a biological shield against age-related cognitive decline. When we stop fighting our biology and start working with the rules of the hippocampus, learning ceases to be a frustrating battle against getting older. Instead, it becomes our most effective tool for keeping the mind resilient, healthy, and entirely capable of mastering whatever you want to learn next.